Oil, the lifeblood of modern civilization. But our gas-fueled journey is approaching the end of the line.
We are in an SUV headed down a bumpy road toward a cliff.
More and more, we're gobbling up oil faster than we can pump it out. And what happens when the wells run dry?
The world descends into a giant global recession, and people start pushing other people trying to get at the last of the oil.
That will very quickly ignite the last war we'll ever fight.
The struggle for oil could mean the end of civilization.
The four horsemen: war, famine, pestilence, and death.
Oil apocalypse on Mega Disasters. Our world is a giant machine with billions of moving parts. Its primary fuel is oil. Here in the United States, 98% of our 300 million cars and trucks run on gasoline. Nearly 100% of our farm vehicles are diesel-powered. 99% of our railways run on diesel as well. And all of our planes fly on jet fuel. As long as the oil flows, we'll be just fine. But what happens when it stops? Experts tell us that it's not a question of if, but when.
We always knew that the oil would run out sooner or later. It's a non-renewable resource. But it was always assumed that it would be several generations from now. We would be in our grandchildren's lifetime or sometime after that. And by that time, we'd figure out something else. But here it is, the beginning of the 21st century, and we're already starting to see the signs of global oil production peak. And where's our plan B?
Failing to plan is planning to fail. And I have not seen any plan so far.
A report issued in February 2007 by the U.S. Government Accountability Office states that world oil production is expected to peak sometime within the next few decades. But despite this prediction, the federal government hasn't devised a plan to deal with the frightening consequences. As the world's oil supplies become depleted, we could be faced with rationing, social unrest, and even war.
The demand for oil keeps increasing, particularly with China and India becoming nations of drivers. And with the demand increasing and the supply decreasing, there will be a crunch.
The worst case scenario is a global recession, and the recession seems to be going on and on. The argument of do something about it is increasingly brought to governments, and they turn to military action.
We are on our way to a disaster. So in order for us to avoid that, we better get ready and be prepared.
But while everyone feels the pain at the pump, very little has been done to prepare for the worst.
The average citizen doesn't feel any real threat from this because they've always had what they needed. Technology has always come through, and their leaders have always come through in one way or another, and they just believe that the future is going to be like the past.
But this time, it may be different.
I fear in my heart that it is too late and we cannot overcome this problem.
The challenges are staggering. The transition from fossil fuels to alternative renewable energies is only now beginning to be ramped up. Solar and wind could help, but at present, they provide less than 1% of our energy. Besides, they produce electricity, not fuel for transportation. Oil is not only our main transportation fuel, it also provides nearly 50% of all our energy needs. Petrochemicals are also the basic compounds in the majority of our day-to-day products, like plastics, asphalt, tires, polyester, as well as cosmetics and pharmaceuticals. We didn't always rely on oil. Prior to the mid-19th century, the major sources of power were animal, human, wind, water, coal, and wood. When Colonel Edwin Drake drilled the first American oil well in Pennsylvania in 1859, few realized how important this product would become for our society.
When we first started using oil back in the 19th century, it was for lubrication and also for lighting.
But a few decades after Drake's first well, the automobile made petroleum a vital resource. To feed this hunger for oil, geologists were continually on the hunt for more oil fields. Petroleum fueled the technological expansion of America and the world. It was in planes, trains, and automobiles. Cheap and plentiful, oil was both the goose and the golden egg, stimulating progress that seemed as if it would go on forever. But in the 1950s, a crack appeared. Shell Oil's chief geologist, M. King Hubbert, came to an ominous conclusion.
In 1956, he made a prediction that the U.S. dominance in oil would come to an end around 1970, when our ability to extract oil from U.S. wells would start to decline. It was not very well received at the time because people thought that the supply of oil would go on increasing exponentially forever.
That's because during the 1950s, the U.S. had thousands of productive oil wells, pumping 10 million barrels a day. But since we used only 7 million, we were able to export our surplus. At the time, the world was consuming 20 million barrels of oil a day, and the U.S. was providing half of the world's oil. But Hubbert's prediction proved correct. After 1970, U.S. production peaked and began to slip.
Since 1970, the U.S. has been producing, on average, less oil every year.
Today, the U.S. produces only 8.3 million barrels of oil each day, yet consumes more than 20 million barrels.
And so that's why we have to import something like 2/3 of the oil that we use now.
Every day, America buys around 12 million barrels of foreign oil.
We are taking a huge amount of our wealth and transferring it to oil-producing countries, some of which are not our best friends.
Not only are the U.S. and many European and Asian nations relying on foreign oil, much of that oil is getting harder to obtain.
We haven't run out of oil. What we've run out of is readily accessible, high-quality, low-cost oil. There will be oil around for another 100, 150 years. Ever more difficult to get, ever more costly.
There was a second part to Hubbert's prediction. He calculated that world oil production would peak during the early part of the 21st century and slide into permanent decline. Some experts today believe his peak oil theory has already been confirmed.
It's much like the story of the boy who cried wolf. And people learn not to pay attention, but at the end of the story, the wolf really does show up. And at the end of the story, the wolf really will show up in the fact that oil will run out.
Despite this, for decades we've been increasing our dependence on oil.
Part of us understands that oil can't be forever. And yet we're kind of addicted to this infrastructure, this culture that we're in.
People have left the cities and they've left rural areas. There's been huge economic growth in the suburbs and the exurbs. And driving a car is not discretionary. This is how you get to work, do your shopping, go to school. The car is really part of how people live. And they like to do that particularly in big SUVs, which are fast and comfortable and people think are safe.
And now, as China, India, and other developing nations are rapidly industrializing, they're creating an energy-hungry consumer class. As oil production inevitably begins to max out, there will be less to go around, with dire consequences.
I just can't imagine societies willingly accepting a enormously decreased quality of life when they have a huge military that could get the oil.
Many experts worry that with transportation, industry, agriculture, and communications grinding to a halt, the result could be a desperate scramble for the basic necessities of life. Region against region, nation against nation. Is the world really running out of oil? We've already consumed 1 trillion barrels of petroleum since 1859. But scientists are telling us there may be 1, 2, or even 3 trillion barrels left. So, should we be alarmed?
The 3 trillion that is left might not last as much as the 1 trillion.
That's because our rate of consumption is accelerating. We are depleting this huge inventory faster than ever.
Peak oil as a topic of severity to the 21st century will very quickly overwhelm global warming as the thing we're all focusing on, because this is a problem that's on our doorstep now or maybe already inside our room.
And while we might not know the exact expiration date on the world as we know it, that day will come. So the quest for new oil is a matter of survival. Petroleum is typically found deep within the earth. Tens of millions of years ago, tiny plants and sea creatures died and fell to the ocean floor and were covered by sediment. Over thousands of centuries, the mass of organic material went through a chemical transformation.
If it reaches just the right temperature, it got cooked into oil.
If the oil becomes trapped within the sedimentary layers by a layer of rock, it forms a reservoir.
Oil is lighter than water. It will float up. And we need something to prevent that oil from coming all the way to the surface and evaporating naturally.
In the early days of oil exploration, engineers would drill wells in and near areas where oil was actually seeping up and out of the earth.
Gradually, geologists got better and better at understanding how oil was formed in the first place, and therefore where to look for it, and started applying more and more technology to it.
Since the 1930s, geophysicists looking for likely reservoirs of oil have utilized seismic imaging to study the ground below the surface. It's similar to the medical technology of ultrasound. They send sound waves into the earth and measure the way the sound bounces back. While this technology helps, oil exploration is still a gamble. If the well turns out to be productive, the crude oil will then go to the refinery, where it's modified to make gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and other products. But finding the oil and getting it out of the ground is only half the challenge. You also have to be able to get to the oil.
The big issue on oil is whether we will have access to oil fields, whether U.S. companies or the developed world, our allies, will have access to the oil fields.
Saudi Arabia cranks out more than 10 million barrels of oil daily. And since it consumes only a fraction of what it produces, it is the world's leading oil supplier.
Saudi Arabia is by far the most influential. It is irreplaceable. This is like the central bank. You shut it down, you shut the whole global energy system down.
Some experts, including Houston investment banker Matthew Simmons, believe that Saudi Arabia has already reached peak oil production and that its current rate of export cannot be maintained. Based on his research and laid out in his book, Twilight in the Desert, he claims Saudi Arabia has inflated its oil reserves from 160 to 260 billion barrels.
They have vast amounts of oil, but it's a little bit like when you're using toothpaste, and about halfway through the tube, it starts to get harder and harder to get the remaining amount out, and you finally throw the toothpaste tube away with an awful lot of toothpaste still left in the tube. It's just not worth getting out. That's where we are today with our high-quality oil.
Conventional wells typically can only extract about 1/3 of the oil that's in a specific field. So even though there may still be plenty of oil left, most of it goes unused. While new technologies are helping maximize the amount of oil that can be extracted, they often only speed up the depletion process. Eventually, oil shortages are inevitable. In 1973, we got a highly unpleasant first taste of what we could face when an artificial oil shortage was created by OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. The oil embargo led to huge increases in the price of gasoline, gas rationing, and long lines. This in turn caused inflation, unemployment, and a recession that took years to resolve. American consumers responded by rejecting gas guzzlers and briefly becoming infatuated with smaller, more fuel-efficient cars. But other countries took a more proactive approach. Brazil developed a massive industry to turn sugarcane into ethanol. Today, most of Brazil's 3 million cars run on either ethanol or gasohol, a combination fuel product.
What Brazil did was exactly what other countries ought to have done, and that is to look for sources of energy which you controlled, which was in your country.
But after oil prices stabilized in the 1980s and 90s, American consumers lost their interest in fuel efficiency. With the return of cheap oil came a turn toward gas-thirsty SUVs and high-powered cars. In recent years, however, the price of oil has shot back up again, and the oil-rich Middle East is more unstable than ever.
Americans all want to have energy independence, although they don't understand what that means. They want to reduce the dependence on the Middle East. They'd like greater efficiency, but they don't want pain.
Now, many experts are wondering if this is the right time to expand the use of ethanol in America. For years, the U.S. has included ethanol in most of its gasoline to avoid engine knock. It comprises about 10% of most U.S. gasoline. Ethanol, which is actually a high-proof version of alcohol, is made by fermenting any number of organic substances, such as sugarcane, grains, corn, or even lawn clippings and garbage. In the U.S., most of it comes from corn. Producing ethanol is relatively easy, but it comes with some vexing problems. It's not cheap to make, and it can wreak havoc with our food supply. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, Colorado is exploring ways to make ethanol more affordable and a viable alternative to gasoline.
Our analysis shows that it would be comparative to $3.50 a gallon for the fuel. And really, we want to get that down to $2 a gallon. And that's really the research that we're doing at this facility, is specifically improving the fermentation and the other processes to greatly reduce this cost of producing this fuel.
But since ethanol requires so much energy to make and causes pollution, many experts view it as only a temporary fix to our energy problems.
On our current slate of things we're working on, we're having a passionate love affair with ethanol. That is a real bad product. So strike that one off the list.
The hope now is that we can develop other alternative energies before our world comes crashing down. Oil won't last forever, and the days of the gasoline-powered automobile may be numbered. If we want to avoid a catastrophic social breakdown, many experts believe we must focus our efforts on reinventing the car.
There's a variety of options that we have, and the difficult challenge for us is it will take time to make the transition.
One possible solution, hydrogen fuel cell technology, has been around for decades. It's been used to power our spacecraft, including the space shuttle. It would seem to be an ideal alternative. Powerful, renewable, clean energy. No harmful emissions.
Many of the car companies are investing in hydrogen fuel cells and saying that we'll have commercial hydrogen cars in the next decade or two.
At the National Renewable Energy Lab in Colorado, scientists are helping to develop this new technology. This demonstration model shows how it works.
It starts with sunlight coming in, producing electricity through a photovoltaic solar cell. That then uses electricity in an electrolyzer, which splits water, which is H2O, into hydrogen and oxygen. It then separates the hydrogen and oxygen and feeds them back into a fuel cell, producing electricity, water, and heat. And that then can provide the power for a car.
So simple, so elegant. There are just a few hitches. For one thing, the price. Demonstration models of fuel cell cars currently cost up to $1 million. And there are other problems. Unlike oil or ethanol, hydrogen in itself is not an energy source. It takes energy to create it.
You have to make the hydrogen from something else. Most commercially made hydrogen now is from natural gas. It's possible to make hydrogen from water, but that requires a lot of electricity.
So, if practical fuel cells are decades away, what's the short-term solution? A growing number of energy experts believe hybrid technology can help bridge the gap. Honda introduced the first mass-produced car of this type, the Insight, to the U.S. market in 1999. These cars are amazingly efficient. They use an electric motor and a gasoline engine, which coordinate to power the vehicle. Hybrids use much less gas than conventional cars because electric motors are far more efficient than even the best internal combustion engines. And hybrids are getting more popular.
Hybrid sales are up, but the fact of the matter is it takes about 14 years to turn over the capital stock of the automobile fleet. So we're just beginning on that. There's still a lot of SUVs out there and people want to keep driving.
Nonetheless, with gas prices going up, SUV sales are down, and hybrid technology continues to evolve. The next phase is a plug-in hybrid. Charged up overnight, it could take the average commuter on a 40-mile round trip, using only the vehicle's electric motor without reverting to gasoline power.
A special feature of a plug-in hybrid is that you have more battery capacity and you're able to go 10, 20, 30, 40 miles depending on the battery size and capacity.
The challenge now is to develop batteries that pack a bigger bang of energy and last longer. Meanwhile, fully electric cars, previously introduced by General Motors 10 years ago, are making a comeback. The Detroit automaker promises to roll out a production model of its concept car, the Volt, within a few years. While this may sound like good news on the surface, a closer look reveals that any kind of electric car will be accompanied by a whole new set of challenges.
Where do we get all the extra electricity? And the most likely source, of course, is coal, because that's where we're getting most of our electricity now.
If we have an electric power plant that's based on coal, it generates a great amount of carbon dioxide and unfortunately mercury as well, which is currently put into the atmosphere. This causes climate change.
But the development of new technology may provide a solution.
There are several ways we can deal with that carbon dioxide. In a big plant, it is not terribly difficult to capture the carbon dioxide. It's expensive, but not difficult.
Instead of allowing the carbon dioxide to be released up into the atmosphere, it can be piped down deep into the earth for permanent storage. Experts hope this will allow us to burn coal cleanly.
Clean coal technology would be one of the pillars, if you will, of any long-term national energy policy.
Even nuclear energy, with its potential for dangerous reactor failures and radioactive waste that lasts thousands of years, is being reconsidered for expansion. Currently supplying 1/5 of U.S. power, it has a key advantage.
Nuclear is one of the few options that we have that offers a means of producing electric power without emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases.
By far the most widespread and cleanest energy resources available are solar and wind. Scientists are working to achieve the next breakthrough in these alternative energy technologies.
The purpose of this lab is to try to blend and meld together multiple ways of making different types of solar cells in order to make them more efficient and reduce the cost.
But it will take decades before solar and wind power will be widespread enough to replace coal and provide the power for electric cars.
The truth is, we are never going to be able to just unplug one thing and plug in another thing, and that is a great myth that Americans continue to have.
We need now to have a very aggressive conservation program to buy some time and free up some energy. What are the best risks for the future?
Conservation is almost always cheaper and faster to apply than research into energy sources or ramping up alternative energy production.
But energy conservation would require a drastic change in a lifestyle dependent upon oil and other fossil fuels.
We live like the gods. The energy we use just permits us an incredible quality of life. And of course, the big challenge is, what can we do to preserve the quality of life that we have now?
Ironically, the high price of gasoline may actually be helping to motivate conservation and innovation.
If you have the higher price, you will have the incentive, if you will, for companies and governments and individuals to invest in energy resources.
The high price of oil is, in fact, probably one of the most important factors to getting these alternative technologies in the market more quickly.
What is the best solution? There is no one best solution. It's really an array of solutions, a combination.
You can either make a comfortable transition now or a very rough transition later. It's doable and you can sustain a good lifestyle. Now, you may not have gigantic multi-ton SUVs for everyone to thunder around in, but it's going to end sooner or later.
But for the time being, the gasoline-fueled automobile is the beast with an unlimited appetite. To continue to feed it, the oil companies will have to do everything they can to find new sources of supply. If they can achieve this, they'll help buy us more time to develop alternative energies before it's too late. The sobering reality we face is that we can no longer count on getting oil as cheaply and easily as we have in the past.
Every day that we debate peak oil, we actually pull ourselves one more day closer to the abyss. If we wait until we're absolutely certain that oil has peaked, we've missed the boat. We've run out the clock.
So geologists and engineers are doing everything they can to extract every last drop of oil.
The technologies have evolved dramatically in the last few decades. And of course, that allows us to go to areas that earlier would have been unthinkable.
But the challenge is huge.
We are seeing discoveries now at very deep formation. We're talking about 40,000 feet. That is in 10,000 feet or deeper water depth.
You're getting to the kind of tolerances and the kind of investment that you need for the space program. This is very, very sophisticated stuff.
200 miles off the coast of Louisiana, way out in the Gulf of Mexico, a team of engineers and geologists is working on perhaps the most technologically daring petroleum project ever attempted. Devon Energy, a fossil fuel exploration and development company, is using an advanced scientific technique for deep water drilling. The goal is to get to oil that's 5 miles below the ocean floor.
Finding and producing reserves in the United States is key for us. We want to become less and less dependent on foreign oil and gas. Hence, we still have many deep water and unexplored horizons within our own U.S. boundaries. The deep water Gulf of Mexico being one of the most exciting ones.
Each exploratory well costs $100 million. The process is enormously difficult, costly, and risky. But the stakes have never been higher. It could take 6 years to develop this area, at a staggering expense of about $6 billion. But the company's engineers and seismologists are hoping there could be oil reserves containing as much as 15 billion barrels. Another area of great interest is oil sand, also known as tar sand, a mixture of sand or clay water and very heavy crude oil. There are vast reserves of oil sands in Alberta, Canada. Engineers don't drill for this oil, they mine it.
It's a mega open pit mining project. Mine the sands, cook them, extract the oil, put the sand back in place as best you can.
Partly due to the mining of oil sands, Canada has ramped up production in recent years. It's now become the U.S.'s #1 supplier of imported oil, outranking even Saudi Arabia. But there are drawbacks to this source of oil as well.
It is not easy, it is messy, it is costly, and it's environmentally challenging. So there is no free lunch.
Another major supplier, Venezuela, has huge deposits of heavy oil. It exports around 2.2 million barrels daily, even though much of it is considered to be inferior to Middle Eastern oil.
The quality of oil makes it less attractive in terms of suitability for refining and other application, but Venezuela heavy oil reserve could be running in the hundreds of billions of barrels.
The type of heavy oil found there needs more refining than the light crude that comes from the Middle East. But the growing demand has made Venezuelan oil economically attractive. As geologists search everywhere for more petroleum, their attention has focused on the potential of oil shale. First discovered in the early part of the 20th century, oil shale is not liquid. The oil must be withdrawn from solid rock.
Oil shale is unborn oil. It's organic inclusions in rocks that sank not deep enough in the earth to be cooked into oil. And so it's not oil.
There are vast deposits of oil shale in Colorado.
That area holds more oil in the form of oil shale than the total oil reserves of Saudi Arabia.
Unlike regular petroleum, oil shale is actually refined in place. One method being tested is a process in which heated carbon dioxide is injected down into the shale formation. And when it turns to liquid oil, it is then pumped out. But again, there are problems.
It's environmentally very damaging and extremely expensive, and it may take more energy to produce the oil than the oil will produce. So whether oil shale will ever be an important resource remains to be seen.
Another possible source of oil is coal. During World War II, the Nazis, desperate to fuel their war machine, developed this technology.
The Germans flew their Air Force during World War II on aviation gasoline made from soft brown coal. So the technology is not a mystery.
And we have vast supplies of coal.
We are the Saudi Arabia of coal in the world. We have massive reserves, and the technology is available to take that coal and make it into high-quality diesel fuel and gasoline.
But converting coal to oil is another short-term solution, as it is expensive, polluting, and doesn't get us away from fossil fuels. So switching over to any one of these possible energy sources comes with high costs and unknown consequences. But tough times may call for tough measures.
It's already too late to have a truly soft landing. In other words, we can't start now to make these changes and hope to have a transition from our current society to a truly sustainable society without any cost, without any pain.
But if we forego that pain, experts fear that the price of inaction could be an all-out war over oil. As demand for oil continues to outpace supply, a domino effect of serious developments could propel us toward a tipping point, from which we would plunge into social and economic chaos, and worse.
There isn't a viable Plan B out there. And the alternative to Plan B, sort of Plan C, is a global recession worse than the Great Depression of the 1930s. The four horsemen of the apocalypse: war, famine, pestilence, and death.
Based upon projections by a growing group of energy experts, the following scenario could be our fate in the not-too-distant future. By 2012, an energy-hungry middle class of automobile owners has continued to explode in China, India, and other developing countries. The world's demand for oil has jumped from 84 million barrels a day to 100 million. Producers and refiners cannot keep up. This creates a ripple effect. Nations begin jockeying for position as oil becomes ever more scarce. With oil supplies as tight as they are, a sudden man-made or natural disaster could trigger the unthinkable.
My biggest fear, and should be the world's biggest fear, is something similar to September 11 would take place in Saudi Arabia.
The Saudi facility at Ras Tanura is the largest terminal in the Persian Gulf. It receives and transports 10 million barrels of oil a day. If Ras Tanura or another major terminal were to be hit by terrorists, the results could be catastrophic. Even under normal conditions, these kinds of facilities are extremely dangerous, as oil is highly flammable and explosive. So once a facility is struck, a disastrous series of events could quickly cause a shutdown. If this happens, millions of barrels of oil a day could not be processed and shipped out, and the world economy could quickly slip into a recession.
My biggest concern long-term is a real outstripping of supply and a complete failure or breakdown in the system of energy security.
We got a precursor in the United States in the summer of 1979 when we had our second long gas lines. There were shootings, there were fistfights, and cars would be smashed.
the crisis deepens, the price of oil rises sharply to $150 a barrel. A gallon at the pump reaches a shocking $8. The SUV owner has to cough up nearly $200 to fill up. Tens of millions of people in the suburbs with no available mass transportation can't get to work. As oil prices rise, farms can no longer produce food cheaply. Trucking costs tied to the price of fuel rise dramatically.
That'll raise the price of food. So if you have a combination of rapidly increasing energy costs and food costs, that means a general economic recession is almost a guarantee.
That first winter, there are shortages and price spikes in home heating oil. To cope, many return to using wood for fuel. The skies turn an ever-present gray. People who lack fuel altogether will not survive. With so many products dependent on gasoline, either for their delivery or manufacture, the price of the basic necessities of life skyrockets. Hunger, disease, and crime become rampant. The price of transportation fuel shoots up, beyond the reach of most consumers and manufacturers. Businesses, even Fortune 500 companies, begin to fail. The economic slide worsens. We're now in a full-blown depression.
We'd have an increasing problem with unemployment. People would be losing their homes because they couldn't make the payments. Banks would be failing.
The stock market crashes. Breadlines return. Millions of people become homeless. Inflation rises so high, money becomes practically worthless.
The government would have to deal with people not having anywhere to go, not having jobs, and they'd have riots and unrest in the street.
As the economy crumbles, the black market takes over. Gangs rise up to protect the traders. Society teeters on the edge of collapse.
As people lose their connection with a larger functional social matrix, they'll try to survive any way they can.
Motorcycles rule the day, tricked out to run on ethanol made on rooftops and in backyards. It's a Mad Max world in which people cobble together their own Plan B strategies for survival. In order to save their desperate nations, governments consider armed intervention.
The United States and China have both announced that they will not be denied access to world oil supplies because oil is vital to their economies. And a lot of wars have been fought over less than that.
If outside nations invade the Middle East to get to the fields, they may be faced with nuclear weapons the oil-producing nations have procured to defend the last of their oil.
Because this is the most important aspect of the economy, this will be something we'll fight over. It'll be a real quick solution. Society will end.
Is this nightmare scenario inevitable? Some experts believe there's still time to do something about this impending oil crisis.
We have a real narrow window of maybe 5 to 7 years to avert the clash of society and implement a very massive Plan B that takes global coordination.
I am a real believer that every individual can make a difference in this, and conservation is going to be at least half the equation going into the future.
We have to basically grow up and realize that there are challenges, that we have to make some changes, sacrifices. But again, it is better than war. Any sacrifice we make out of our pocketbook or inconvenient, it is better than losing somebody else's life. Far better.